Okay, let's unpack this. Imagine a place where faith and finance collide. Not in a quiet offering plate, but in a dazzling display of private jets, sprawling mansions, and astronomical personal fortunes.
Hmm.
We're talking about a segment of modern Christianity that, on the surface, operates as a nonprofit, yet functions with all the clear objectives of a multi-million-dollar corporation.
It's quite a picture, isn't it?
It really is. Today, we're diving deep into the Mammon Matrix. Now, for those unfamiliar, Mammon is an ancient Aramaic word that essentially means wealth or property, often personified as a false god or an evil influence of riches.
Right. It's that idea of wealth as an idol.
Exactly. So this isn't just about money. It's about the unsettling point where the pursuit of wealth seems to become the primary focus of religious organizations. We're talking about what are being called for-profit ministries entities that, despite their tax-exempt status, seem to have wealth accumulation as their driving goal. Think of prominent televangelists like Kenneth Copeland, Creflo Dollar, and Joyce Meyer, whose undeniably lavish lifestyles have sparked serious questions and, for many, deep concerns.
What's truly intriguing here, I think, is the profound paradox at play. You have a system designed, supposedly, to serve the public good, to facilitate charity and spiritual growth, being leveraged to build vast personal and corporate financial empires. Our mission today is to really dissect how these entities manage to do that.
Okay.
We'll explore the intricate legal and financial structures they exploit, delve into the sophisticated psychological dynamics that not only draw in but also tightly control their followers. And finally, we'll place this gospel of wealth in direct, stark opposition to the explicit teachings of Jesus Christ himself. This will reveal a chasm, a truly unsettling divide between the pursuit of mammon and the foundational tenets of Christian faith. It raises an important question. How can something intended to be profoundly spiritual become so overtly commercial and, frankly, so financially opaque?
Absolutely. This deep dive is your shortcut to understanding a complex and often controversial area. We're going to pull back the curtain on the legal architecture that allows this to happen, expose the surprising business model underpinning it all, and then really dig into the powerful psychology that persuades millions. And, ultimately, we'll confront the profound theological contradictions at the heart of it. Prepare for some surprising facts and definitely more than a few aha moments as we explore this fascinating intersection of faith and finance. So to truly understand how this Mammon Matrix operates, we first need to pull back the curtain on its underlying structure, how these ministries are set up, and how they manage to accumulate so much wealth, often with very little public scrutiny. Let's begin with what we call the architecture of enrichment, unpacking the for-profit ministry model, starting with this incredible veil of nonprofit status, legal structures, and financial opacity. It all begins with how these organizations are officially classified, doesn't it?
Indeed it does. The entire legal foundation for these ministries rests on their classification as tax-exempt organizations under U.S. law. Specifically, Internal Revenue Code, or IRC, Section 501c3, grants this status to entities that are organized and operated exclusively for religious, charitable, scientific, literary, or educational purposes. The benefits are significant. They're exempt from federal income taxes, and critically, contributions made to them by donors are tax-deductible.
Right, that's huge for fundraising.
Exactly. The clear intent behind this legal structure was, and remains, to support organizations that genuinely serve a public or charitable need, not those designed to generate personal profit for individuals.
Here's where it gets really interesting, and frankly, a bit astonishing. While nearly all other nonprofits think your local hospital, university, or any major charity have to file an annual Form 990 with the IRS, which is a vital tool for transparency, churches and their affiliates are explicitly exempt from this requirement. So what does this massive exemption mean for oversight in practice?
That exemption is, quite simply, a game changer. And it's the foundational distinction that creates the conditions for potential abuse, really. Well, for most nonprofits, the Form 990 is like an annual financial X-ray. It's a detailed information return that discloses a wealth of data to the public. There are various revenue sources, detailed breakdowns of expenses, their assets, liabilities, and, most importantly for our discussion, the compensation paid to their officers and key employees.
The salaries.
Exactly. The absence of this filing requirement for churches effectively creates a financial black box. It means their internal financial operations are largely shielded from routine public and regulatory scrutiny. For you, the donor, or even independent watchdog groups, it becomes nearly impossible to verify how contributions are actually being used, or to independently assess whether those funds are being channeled for the private enrichment of the leadership rather than the stated charitable purpose.
So if I'm understanding this correctly, legally they're one thing, a nonprofit, but functionally, in terms of their actual operations, they're often something else entirely, behaving more like a commercial enterprise.
Precisely. There's a stark, often jarring divergence between an organization's legal form and its functional reality. A true nonprofit's primary goal is clear: social impact, serving a public good, investing back into its mission. A for-profit company, by its very nature, exists to generate financial gain for its owners, its shareholders. What we see with many televangelist ministries, despite holding that 501c status, is that they operate with a clear profit maximization motive. Their substantial revenues often translate directly into exorbitant salaries, lavish benefits, and incredibly opulent lifestyles for their leaders. This, simply put, constitutes private inurement.
Private inurement meaning?
Meaning the organization's earnings are benefiting private individuals directly, which is strictly forbidden for a nonprofit. It fundamentally contravenes the very spirit and intent of 501c regulations, even if they sometimes manage to wiggle around the exact letter of the law.
That makes perfect sense. Now, in the absence of this mandatory government oversight, some organizations attempt to self-regulate, right? Like the Evangelical Council for Financial Accountability, the ECFA.
Yes, that's correct. The ECFA has emerged as a voluntary accountability body within the Christian community. It accredits Christian organizations that commit to specific standards of financial transparency, including making audited financial statements available to the public. And on paper, that sounds like a good step towards oversight.
That does sound good.
However, while some megachurches do voluntarily seek and maintain this accreditation, the system's effectiveness is certainly debatable.
Why is that?
Well, the ECFA has faced significant criticism for failing to identify and act on major financial misconduct at prominent member organizations, a notable example being the Harvest Bible Chapel scandal.
I remember that.
Right. And critics argue that since the ECFA is funded by membership fees from the very organizations it's supposed to police, a built-in conflict of interest inevitably exists.
Okay. The fox guarding the hen house situation.
Kind of, yeah. This structure suggests that self-regulation, in many cases, is simply inadequate as a robust check on the potential for financial abuse, especially when billions of dollars are flowing through these entities.
So it almost sounds like religious freedom, a principle meant to protect faith, is being unintentionally or even intentionally used to shield these financial operations from scrutiny.
That's a truly striking element here. The legal architecture, initially intended to protect religious freedom from undue government entanglement, has been, in effect, inverted and weaponized by some of these organizations.
Weaponized? Wow.
The First Amendment and IRS regulations grant a uniquely protected status to churches, based on the fundamental assumption that they are non-commercial spiritual entities serving a purely public purpose. These for-profit ministries cleverly exploit this by adopting the legal form of a church to gain its broad protections while simultaneously operating with the commercial substance and aggressive financial goals of a private corporation.
So they get the best of both worlds, legally speaking.
Pretty much. When challenged, for instance, during the U.S. Senate Finance Committee probe led by Senator Chuck Grassley, they often quickly invoke religious freedom. They know that the IRS is significantly constrained by special rules limiting church audits and, crucially, lacks the baseline Form 990 data that would typically trigger a deeper inquiry into other nonprofits.
Right. The data just isn't there.
Exactly. The implication is profound. It creates a system where the very entities most in need of financial oversight, given their scale and commercial activities, are the most insulated from it. This ultimately leads to a severe crisis of accountability that erodes public trust, not just in these specific ministries, but unfortunately in all religious institutions.
That sets the stage perfectly for understanding their underlying strategy. Now let's move on to how the system truly becomes a business plan. Let's talk about the prosperity gospel itself. What exactly is it at its core, and how does this theology transform into such a lucrative business model?
The prosperity gospel, also often referred to as the word of faith movement, is far more than just a set of theological beliefs. It functions as an incredibly effective and, well, lucrative business model. Its central tenets are quite seductive. It teaches that God desires all believers to experience abundant financial blessing and physical health.
Okay, Sounds appealing.
Absolutely. And crucially, these blessings are presented as being unlocked through specific acts of faith, positive confession, speaking your desires into existence, and most importantly, through financial donations.
Ah, there's the money connection.
There it is.
Yeah.
This creates a direct transactional relationship between giving and receiving. If we connect this to the bigger picture, this fundamentally reframes the act of religious giving. Instead of being an act of selfless worship or pure charity,
Right.
it's presented as a spiritual investment with a guaranteed and often magnified return on investment or ROI.
Like a divine vending machine.
That's a pretty good analogy, yeah. You put in your money, and God is obligated, according to this teaching, to give you blessings back, often far in excess of what you gave.
So this is how they generate such astronomical amounts of money. It's not just regular tithes and offerings, is it?
That's right. While regular tithes are foundational, the primary engine driving their revenue is the concept of seed faith giving.
Seed faith.
Yeah. Followers are relentlessly encouraged to sow a seed, which is always interpreted as giving money in order to reap a harvest of divine blessings. This isn't just a suggestion, it's reinforced through often manipulative and decontextualized interpretations of Scripture.
Like what? Give me an example.
A prime example is the use of Malachi 3.10, where the Bible talks about bringing tithes to the storehouse. Prosperity preachers twist this to claim that failing to tithe is equivalent to robbing God,
Wow.
and that believers should test God by giving ever larger sums, assuring them God is obligated to respond with blessings. It puts immense pressure on people.
I can imagine.
Beyond these direct appeals, these ministries generate substantial income through product sales. We're talking about a vast array of merchandise. Books, CDs, DVDs, streaming content, branded apparel, even anointed items like prayer cloths.
So it's like a merchandise store attached to the ministry.
Essentially, yes. These products are heavily promoted during broadcasts and services, blurring the line entirely between a religious ministry and a commercial retail enterprise. You're not just attending a service, you're also being presented with a catalog.
Got it.
Lastly, these organizations build vast media empires. Think of powerful networks like the Christian Broadcasting Network, CBN, or the Trinity Broadcasting Network, TBN. They form strategic partnerships to expand their global reach, reaching millions of households. But the high cost of television airtime, studio production, and global broadcasting necessitates aggressive and continuous fundraising.
It sounds like a self-feeding loop.
It creates a self-perpetuating cycle, exactly. They need more money to reach more people who then are asked for even more money. It's a closed loop designed to generate ever-increasing revenue.
This seed faith concept and the promise of amplified returns sounds strangely familiar, doesn't it? Almost like a business model many people are very familiar with, but often with negative connotations.
It absolutely does. There's a striking, even unsettling similarity between the logic of this seed faith doctrine and the structure of a multi-level marketing or MLM scheme.
An MLM, how so?
Think about it. In an MLM, participants are typically required to make an initial investment to join, analogous to the seed donation in the prosperity model.
Okay, the buy-in.
Right. Both systems promise disproportionate returns and financial freedom based on this initial buy-in and subsequent actions, whether it's recruiting others in an MLM or making continued increasing donations in a prosperity church.
I see the parallel.
And here's where it really gets problematic. In both structures, the vast majority of financial rewards flow to the very top of the pyramid, the company founders in an MLM, or the head pastor and leadership in a prosperity ministry.
Right, the money flows up.
Exactly. The lavish lifestyles of these leaders are then explicitly presented as undeniable, tangible proof that the system works, which powerfully serves to motivate lower-level participants to invest more heavily, often far beyond their means.
So the leader's jet becomes advertising for the system.
Precisely. It's proof of concept. And crucially, when the promised success fails to materialize for the average participant, the blame is very neatly internalized.
How does that work?
In an MLM, they might be told they didn't work hard enough, they weren't dedicated enough. In a prosperity ministry, they are told they lacked sufficient faith, or perhaps there's unconfessed sin in their life blocking the blessing.
So it's your fault, not the system's.
Exactly. This mechanism is incredibly clever. It completely deflects criticism from the inherently exploitative structure of the system itself. By framing this financial transaction as a divine principle, the prosperity gospel effectively takes a fundamentally extractive economic model, one that pulls wealth from the many and concentrates it at the top, and it sacralizes it.
Sacralize it, makes it holy.
Yes, cloaking a system of wealth transfer to an elite few in the unassailable language of faith. It's essentially a spiritual Ponzi scheme wrapped in religious language.
That's a truly chilling and insightful comparison. And the undeniable success of this model is really highlighted by the immense wealth accumulated by its most prominent leaders. There was a major U.S. Senate probe into this, right, that shone a light on some of these figures.
Yes, precisely. In 2007, a U.S. Senate Finance Committee probe, led by Senator Chuck Grassley, launched a formal investigation into 6 high-profile televangelists: Kenneth Copeland, Creflo Dollar, Benny Hinn, Joyce Meyer, Eddie Long, and Paula White.
Quite the list.
Indeed. The probe is specifically focused on their exceptionally lavish lifestyles, which included fleets of Rolls-Royces, palatial mansions, and private jets.
Wow.
All allegedly funded by donor contributions from their followers. The investigation specifically highlighted their ministry's profound lack of financial transparency and their consistent resistance to any external oversight.
So what happened? Were there consequences?
Well, the probe eventually concluded in 2011 without definitive findings of widespread wrongdoing, largely due to the lack of cooperation from the ministries and the legal shields available to churches, as we discussed.
The church exemption again.
Exactly. But it undeniably brought international attention to the sheer scale of the wealth involved and the profound lack of accountability within this sector. It put these practices on the public radar in a way they hadn't been before.
And the examples are truly astounding. I remember the headlines around Creflo Dollar's jet request.
Creflo Dollar stands out as a quintessential and frankly brazen example of this unchecked accumulation. In 2015, he infamously launched an online appeal asking his followers to collectively fund the purchase of a brand new ultra-luxury $65 million Gulfstream G650 jet.
$65 million.
$65 million. Now, Dollar already owned a multi-million-dollar mansion and had been labeled the least cooperative during the previous Senate probe into televangelist finances.
So not exactly struggling.
Not at all. Yet he defended his extraordinary request quite bluntly on his website, stating, "If I want to believe God for a $65 million plane, you cannot stop me." It was an appeal that truly encapsulated the audacity and entitlement often seen in these ministries.
Unbelievable. And then there's Kenneth Copeland, whose estimated wealth is truly staggering.
Kenneth Copeland is arguably at the apex of this particular pyramid. His estimated net worth is reported to range anywhere from $300 million to $750 million.
Agreed.
Though, due to the lack of transparency, the exact figures are difficult to confirm. What we do know is that he owns multiple private jets, not just one, but a fleet, and has his own private airport.
His own airport.
His own airport.
Ah, yeah.
His personal residence is a sprawling $6.3 million lakeside mansion, which is conveniently designated as a tax-free church parsonage.
Tax-free, of course.
Meaning it's considered part of his ministry's tax-exempt property. He's also famously, or infamously, defended his extensive use of private jets by claiming he simply cannot fly on commercial airlines because they're like a long tube with a bunch of demons.
A tube with demons. Seriously.
That was his justification, suggesting a spiritual danger in ordinary travel that only a private jet can apparently avert. It's a truly shocking level of privilege and deflection that highlights the profound disconnect between the leaders' lifestyles and the often modest financial situations of their followers. Joyce Meyer's ministry also came under significant scrutiny, particularly in the early 2000s. Investigative reports from that period revealed that Meyer herself received a staggering $900,000 annual salary.
$900,000.
Yes, while her husband received $450,000 from the ministry. Furthermore, their ministry reportedly owned substantial assets, including a $10 million corporate jet and a $2 million home specifically for Meyer and her husband. While it's true that her ministry later implemented some financial reforms and even gained ECFA accreditation, this earlier history clearly demonstrates the model's immense potential for generating enormous personal wealth for its leaders, often at the expense of their congregants' often modest contributions.
Right, the potential is clearly there.
And then we have Benny Hinn, another figure synonymous with the prosperity movement. His ministry has been the subject of numerous critical documentaries, such as HBO's A Question of Miracles and CBC's The Fifth Estate. These investigations didn't just question the authenticity of his highly theatrical healing claims, but they also rigorously scrutinized his financial practices and the personal wealth he accumulated.
So ongoing questions there, too.
Very much so. More recently, in 2017, his headquarters were raided by agents from the IRS and the U.S. Postal Inspection Service, indicating ongoing federal financial scrutiny and the enduring questions surrounding the ethical and legal boundaries of his operations. These aren't just isolated incidents, they're patterns revealing systemic issues.
It's clear that the financial architecture is meticulously constructed to facilitate this wealth. But money alone doesn't explain the profound hold these ministries have over their followers. That leads us directly into the truly compelling psychological components at play. So let's transition into the psychology of persuasion and control. It's not just about the money. There's a powerful psychological component. Who are these leaders? What makes them so effective? And how do they exert such control?
That's a crucial next step because the financial exploitation is just one piece of the puzzle. The leaders of these ministries often embody the traits of what we call a charismatic authoritarian.
Charismatic authoritarian.
Okay, a figure central to the functioning of many high-control groups or even cults. This archetype is typically characterized by a grandiose sense of self-importance, an almost boundless belief in their own unique divine connection, alongside an insatiable need for admiration and attention. Crucially, they often exhibit a profound lack of empathy, enabling them to manipulate and exploit others without significant moral qualms.
The lack of empathy, that's key.
It allows for the manipulation. These individuals masterfully position themselves as the sole arbiters of truth and authority within their sphere, effectively operating beyond any meaningful accountability to their followers, or, often, even their own boards.
So they're basically untouchable within their own system.
Effectively, yes. What's truly striking here is how effectively they wield this influence. A cornerstone of their control is the unequivocal claim of being God's anointed.
God's anointed. I've heard that phrase.
You hear it a lot. This isn't just a casual statement. It functions as an almost impregnable defense against any form of criticism or questioning. By equating themselves directly with divine will, they subtly, or sometimes very overtly, reframe any dissent as a spiritual failing on the part of the questioner.
So if you question them, you're questioning God.
That's the implication. Biblical phrases, such as, "touch not the Lord's anointed," from 1 Chronicles 16.22, are systematically decontextualized and weaponized. They're used to silence opposition, enforce absolute loyalty, and discourage any critical thought. This tactic fosters an environment where followers remain compliant, not merely out of genuine devotion, but often out of a pervasive fear of divine retribution for daring to question God's chosen instrument.
That's powerful control,
Yeah.
fear-based.
Absolutely. These leaders are also absolute masters at creating an alternate reality, a closed ideological system where truth is defined exclusively by their proclamations.
How do they manage that?
This is achieved through a relentless process of indoctrination and thought reform, constantly amplified by a dedicated, self-contained media ecosystem. We're talking about pervasive television programs, a constant stream of books, seminars, and social media content, all reinforcing the leader's narrative.
So you're surrounded by their message.
Completely immersed. Any challenge to this constructed reality, whether it comes from investigative journalists, former members who speak out, or even mainstream theologians who critique their doctrine, is summarily dismissed. These external critics are branded as hostile attacks from the devil, haters, or other malevolent, ungodly forces.
Us versus them.
Exactly. This highly effective tactic reinforces the group's insularity, preventing outside, critical information from penetrating the follower's worldview and breaking the leader's spell.
It sounds like their sermons aren't just typical religious messages, are they? They're more like master classes in sophisticated persuasion, almost like a carefully constructed performance.
Absolutely. Their sermons, their broadcasts, their entire public presence are not simple religious orations. They are highly sophisticated exercises in rhetorical persuasion, meticulously crafted to bypass critical thinking and forge a powerful emotional bond with the audience.
How do they do that?
Well, it starts with emotional manipulation, or pathos. Sermons are designed to evoke intense emotional responses, whether it's soaring joy and hope for a breakthrough or deep fear and guilt about spiritual failure. This creates a powerful experience that often overrides logical analysis and establishes a strong, almost visceral, psychological connection with the speaker.
You feel it rather than think about it.
Precisely. They also utilize very clever linguistic persuasion. This includes employing novelty in their language, sometimes inventing new terms, or using rhetorical questions and elliptical comparatives that deliberately violate normal conversational norms. This captures attention and increases the message's impact. It's like they're hinting at promises instead of saying them outright.
Making you fill in the blanks.
Exactly. By subtly forcing the listener to actively participate in interpreting the meaning to fill in the blanks, these techniques enhance persuasion and retention. This method of conversational implicature also lowers the cognitive defenses of the audience and simultaneously provides the speaker with plausible deniability.
Plausible deniability.
Interesting. Protecting them from accusations of making fraudulent promises. It's a very clever way to promise everything without explicitly guaranteeing anything.
Wow.
And finally, many of these megachurches and ministries have been criticized for adopting the techniques of corporate marketing and even mass entertainment. They blend religion with high production value concerts, dazzling light shows, and motivational speaking,
Turning church into a show.
prioritizing individualism and a consumer-oriented approach over the proclamation of a traditional, often more demanding biblical gospel. It turns worship into a spectacle and the follower into a consumer.
So, given all these sophisticated techniques, who is most susceptible to this message, and why does it resonate so profoundly with them?
The appeal of the prosperity gospel is deeply rooted in its ability to offer simple yet seemingly powerful solutions to complex and deeply felt human needs and vulnerabilities.
Like what kind of vulnerability?
These ministries are incredibly adept at identifying and targeting specific populations. Individuals grappling with crushing financial hardship, those suffering from chronic or terminal illness, people experiencing profound loneliness or the trauma of abuse, or simply those seeking a greater sense of meaning and purpose in a chaotic world. For someone in truly desperate circumstances, perhaps facing insurmountable debt or a life-threatening diagnosis, the message of miraculous healing, guaranteed financial breakthroughs, and divine favor is an incredibly potent and almost irresistible lure.
It offers hope when maybe there isn't much else.
Exactly. It offers a seemingly immediate and divine escape from their suffering, a direct line to a better life. The psychological appeal is incredibly multifaceted, addressing several core human desires simultaneously. Take the name it and claim it doctrine.
Right. Name it and claim it.
It offers a profound sense of personal empowerment and control in a world that often feels chaotic and unpredictable. For individuals facing economic precarity or status anxiety, the belief that they can, through faith, speak their own success into existence provides a powerful psychological anchor. This message effectively sacralizes the concept of self-efficacy, merging the American ideal of self-improvement and entrepreneurial spirit with divine power, suggesting that God is simply waiting for you to declare your prosperity.
So it taps into that desire for control.
Deeply. Furthermore, the prosperity gospel presents a deity who is not a distant sovereign king to be feared and humbly obeyed, but rather a cosmic, benevolent force that can be accessed and, indeed, manipulated through specific formulas of faith, positive words, and, of course, offering.
A user-friendly God.
That's a good way to put it. This user-friendly version of God removes the often intimidating aspects of divine holiness and sovereignty, making God feel more approachable and, from the follower's perspective, incredibly useful in achieving their personal desires. And upon entering these communities, new recruits are often subjected to what's known as love bombing.
Love bombing. What's that?
This is a tactic where they are instantly showered with affection, validation, and intense attention to make them feel profoundly accepted, secure, and valued within the new community. This is critically important during the initial stages of indoctrination, as it rapidly fosters a powerful sense of belonging and community, making the individual far more receptive to the group's teachings and significantly less likely to question them. They feel like they finally found their true home.
So they feel welcomed, accepted, makes them more open.
Exactly. It lowers their defenses.
But what happens when those grand promises don't come true? When the financial breakthrough never arrives or the illness isn't healed? How do people reconcile that painful gap between their deeply held beliefs and their harsh reality?
This is where a central and incredibly powerful psychological mechanism known as cognitive dissonance comes into play.
Cognitive dissonance, that feeling when things don't line up.
Exactly. It's that uncomfortable state of mental stress or discomfort that arises when a person's deeply held beliefs conflict directly with the reality of their experience. For example, believing God promises wealth and health while remaining in poverty or suffering from illness. To resolve this painful tension, followers are systematically taught to avoid questioning the doctrine itself. Instead, they're directed to engage in self-blame.
Self-blame. So it's their fault again.
Precisely. The dissonance is resolved by adopting new, often self-deprecating beliefs. They're taught to think, my faith isn't strong enough, or I must have unconfessed sin in my life that's blocking my blessing, or I didn't give a large enough seed offering.
Wow, that's rough.
It creates a destructive psychological loop. The guilt and shame from this self-blame, combined with the innate human desire for the promised reward, drive the follower to double down.
Double down, meaning
They give more money, confess more positively, strive for what they are told is greater faith, all in a perpetual, unwinnable cycle.
like a gambler chasing losses.
Very much so. This dynamic closely mirrors the gambler's fallacy, where a string of losses reinforces the belief that a big win is due, thus compelling the gambler to keep playing and betting more. This cycle of guilt and perceived spiritual inadequacy ensures a steady, indeed often increasing, stream of revenue for the ministry, while simultaneously trapping the follower in a state of psychological and often financial dependency. So, to simplify, these ministries are incredibly adept at tapping into fundamental human needs. They offer the idea of ultimate control and agency.
Name it and claim it.
Right. They leverage hope and despair with promises of miraculous breakthroughs. They exploit status anxiety by presenting wealth as the ultimate sign of God's favor.
Makes sense.
They provide deceptively simple answers through a formulaic view of faith. They create a powerful sense of belonging through intense love bombing and community. And yes, they even leverage guilt by systematically teaching that any lack of blessing is entirely the follower's own fault.
Creating constant pressure.
Constant pressure to give more, believe more, and blame only themselves.
Given this incredibly powerful and often abusive system, for those who eventually manage to break free, what's the lasting impact? What does that aftermath look like for them?
For those who manage to break free from these deeply high-control environments, the psychological toll is often profound and long-lasting. The experience of leaving isn't merely a change of beliefs, it's an escape from a deeply traumatic environment.
Traumatic, Brent.
Yes. Many former members exhibit symptoms entirely consistent with complex post-traumatic stress disorder, or CPTSD.
CPTSD.
The aftermath is characterized by a constellation of debilitating psychological effects, including deep-seated identity confusion, chronic depression and anxiety, panic attacks, a profound inability to trust others or even themselves, and overwhelming feelings of guilt, shame, and isolation. This is often tragically compounded by the devastating loss of one's entire social structure. Friends, family, and community are often severed through shunning practices.
Get cut off.
Often, yes, leaving the individual feeling utterly alone, adrift, and disoriented in a world that no longer makes sense.
That's devastating.
It truly is, and this isn't just about financial exploitation. It is, at its core, spiritual abuse.
Spiritual abuse. Define that for us.
Spiritual abuse involves the insidious use of religious beliefs, doctrines, and authority to control, manipulate, or harm an individual. The prosperity doctrine, by teaching that negative life events like sickness and poverty are a direct result of an individual's spiritual failings. Their lack of faith, their unconfessed sin, systematically inflicts profound psychological harm.
It blames the victim.
Explicitly, it blames the victim for their own suffering, instilling a pervasive and debilitating sense of guilt and shame. This dynamic, sadly, mirrors a classic abusive relationship. The abuser, in this case, the doctrine and its leader, sets an impossible standard. When the victim inevitably fails to meet it, the abuser blames the victim, thereby reinforcing their control and the victim's sense of worthlessness.
And the money flows from that.
The financial exploitation we've discussed isn't an unfortunate byproduct. It's a direct outcome of this meticulously constructed system of psychological and spiritual abuse.
The real-world stories of this kind of abuse are truly heartbreaking to hear.
They are. Personal testimonies vividly illustrate this devastating human cost. For instance, there are numerous accounts of a blind woman who joined a Word of Faith church and was repeatedly told by the leaders that her continued blindness was entirely her own fault due to insufficient faith.
Oh, it's awful.
Which ultimately plunged her into deep depression and despair. We hear stories from former members of the Word of Faith Fellowship describing terrifying blasting sessions. Where a group surrounds and screams at an individual for hours to drive out demons, often causing severe emotional distress, as well as documented instances of physical beatings.
Physical beatings, too. Goodness.
Yeah. And on the financial side, there are countless stories of pastors and religious leaders stealing life savings from vulnerable members, particularly the elderly, leaving them utterly destitute and with no recourse. These aren't just abstract ideas, they are lived realities for millions.
So hard to imagine.
The journey of leaving these groups often begins with a profound crisis of faith, typically triggered when the promised blessings repeatedly fail to manifest despite fervent belief and increasingly generous giving. This crisis prompts a personal, often very secret, re-examination of the Bible, which, for many, reveals the stark contradictions between the prosperity message and the actual scriptural text.
When the pieces stop fitting together.
Exactly. This path is incredibly fraught with difficulty, often painful and terrifying, but it ultimately leads to a liberating, albeit arduous, break from the movement.
So if someone does manage to break free from such a high-control environment, what does that long and difficult road to recovery look like?
Recovery is, to be blunt, an arduous process of rebuilding one's life from the ground up, in every sense.
How so?
Psychologically, it requires deconstructing years of deep indoctrination, literally unlearning an entire worldview. It involves managing trauma triggers, slowly and painstakingly learning to trust again, both themselves and others. Trust must be shattered, completely, often with the essential help of a therapist specializing in cult recovery or spiritual abuse. Financially, many ex-members find themselves utterly destitute, having given away their life savings or incurred significant debt in pursuit of a promised miracle that never arrived.
So they're broken, traumatized.
Often, yes. So financial recovery involves not only acquiring basic financial literacy and learning to budget, sometimes for the first time, but also overcoming the deep-seated psychological blocks and fears around money that were instilled by the group's teachings. It's a holistic journey of healing and reconstruction.
That brings us to what might be the most crucial section of our deep dive, the theological counter-narrative. Jesus versus the gospel of wealth. This is where we really get into the core contradiction, examining how the teachings of these ministries square with the very founder of Christianity.
You're right. This is the definitive point of critique. The profound and irreconcilable contradiction between these for-profit ministries and their prosperity theology and the authentic teachings of Jesus Christ as recorded in the New Testament is, well, it's staggering.
How so?
The consistent theme throughout Jesus' ministry is not that wealth is a sign of divine blessing or something to be pursued as a primary goal. On the contrary, he consistently warns that it is a significant spiritual impediment and a source of grave danger to one's soul.
It's hard to ignore those explicit warnings, isn't it? As Jesus himself said, no one can serve two masters.
Precisely. Jesus presents the choice between God and wealth not as a mere preference, but as a matter of mutually exclusive loyalties.
Mutually exclusive.
Yeah.
You have to choose.
Yes. His statement in Matthew 6.24, "No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money," Mammon, establishes a foundational principle that the prosperity gospel either entirely ignores or, disturbingly, overtly inverts. He makes it clear that your ultimate allegiance must be to one or the other. They are fundamentally incompatible as masters of your life.
That seems pretty unambiguous.
It is. And the encounter with the rich young ruler in Mark 10.17-27 is a cornerstone of Jesus' economic teaching. Here was a young man, seemingly pious and adhering to all the commandments.
Right, he seemed like a good guy.
Exactly. Yet when Jesus asked him to sell all his possessions and follow him, he was utterly unable to do so because he had great wealth. Jesus' subsequent shocking declaration to his disciples that it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for someone who is rich to enter the kingdom of God serves as a stark, undeniable warning about the spiritual peril of riches.
A camel through a needle's eye. That's pretty impossible sounding.
It underscores that material possessions, far from being a sign of favor, can become an insurmountable barrier to true spiritual commitment and entering God's kingdom. Jesus' parables repeatedly caution against the pursuit of wealth, laying bare its dangers. Consider the parable of the rich fool in Luke 12.32-21.
All right.
It tells the story of a man who tirelessly accumulates vast earthly treasure, building bigger barns for his surplus, only to suddenly lose his life and his soul that very night.
So it was all for nothing.
Exactly. This is a direct, scathing rebuke of greed and hoarding, emphasizing the fleeting, ultimately worthless nature of earthly possessions in the face of eternity. Similarly, the parable of the rich man and Lazarus in Luke 16.19-31 paints a chilling picture of the eternal consequences for those who live in luxury and disregard the desperate suffering of the poor at their very gate,
Ignoring the poor.
highlighting the profound moral imperative of compassion and generosity over accumulation and self-indulgence.
So, if that's what Jesus warned against, what was his alternative vision for how his followers should approach wealth and possessions? What's the true gospel of Jesus in this context?
Jesus' alternative vision is profoundly radical and countercultural. The Sermon on the Mount, found in Matthew chapters 5 through 7, outlines a truly revolutionary economic ethic that directly challenges every premise of prosperity theology.
How does it do that?
For instance, the very first beatitude, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven," Matthew 5.3, is a declaration that God's kingdom belongs not to the materially prosperous or self-sufficient, but to those who humbly recognize their complete dependence on him.
The opposite of self-made success.
Completely. Jesus then explicitly commands his followers, "Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moths and vermin destroy and where thieves break in and steal, but store up for yourselves treasures in heaven," Matthew 6.1.21. He concludes this powerful teaching with the critical principle, "For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also."
Where your treasure is, your heart is, makes sense.
This is a direct and unequivocal refutation of the prosperity gospel's entire objective of accumulating earthly riches as a sign of divine favor. It shifts the focus from material gain to eternal spiritual values.
Okay.
Furthermore, the biblical concept of stewardship, central to parables like the parable of the talents and the parable of the shrewd manager, teaches that believers are not owners of their possessions, but rather managers or stewards of God's resources.
Stewards, not owners.
Right. The goal is not personal accumulation, but the faithful and productive use of those resources for the master's purposes, which explicitly include advancing his kingdom and, critically, caring for the poor and vulnerable in society. The prosperity gospel fundamentally corrupts this by positioning the steward as the primary beneficiary of a master's wealth, essentially turning a divine trust into a vehicle for personal gain and luxury.
Twisting the whole idea.
Completely twisting it. When measured against Orthodox Christian doctrine, the prosperity gospel is revealed to be built not just on a few minor disagreements, but on a foundation of theological errors that distort the biblical message at virtually every critical point.
So it's not just a different flavor of Christianity.
No, it's much deeper than that. This is not merely a different interpretation. It's a fundamental inversion of the Christian story of salvation, or what theologians call soteriology, the study of how humanity is saved.
Okay, explain that inversion.
Consider the core difference in the understanding of salvation. Orthodox Christianity teaches that humanity is fallen, inherently self-centered, and in need of salvation from sin and this self-centeredness, with the ultimate goal being to serve God and others.
Saved from self.
Right. The prosperity gospel, in stark contrast, teaches that salvation is primarily the key to unlocking divine power for the very purpose of serving the self through personal empowerment, abundant health, and vast wealth.
Saved to serve self. That's a huge difference.
It's a complete reversal. Then there's the cross itself. In the biblical gospel, the cross is the ultimate symbol of self-denial and sacrificial love, as articulated by Jesus. "If anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me."
Denying yourself.
Yes, it represents suffering for righteousness, dying to self. In the prosperity gospel, the cross is shockingly reinterpreted not as a call to sacrifice, but as the transactional event that somehow purchased the believer's right to worldly self-fulfillment and material gain.
So the cross buys you stuff.
That's the implication. The very object of salvation is changed. Instead of being saved from our selfish desires, followers are taught they are saved in order to fulfill them, with God acting as a cosmic instrument for human self-actualization and material gratification. This is why numerous theological critics have justly labeled it another gospel, a rival religion that simply co-opts Christian language and imagery to preach a message centered on Mammon, not Christ.
Another gospel. Strong words. Let's lay out these differences clearly, side by side, so our listeners can really grasp the contrast between these two theological systems.
Absolutely. Let's compare some key theological tenets point by point. It's helpful to see them contrasted directly. First, the view of wealth. For the prosperity gospel, wealth is seen as an undeniable sign of God's blessing, a tangible proof of favor, and a primary goal for believers to pursue. Poverty, conversely, is often depicted as a curse or a direct result of weak faith or sin.
Wealth, good, poverty, bad, your fault.
Basically. Jesus' teachings, however, consistently present wealth as a significant spiritual danger, a profound obstacle to the kingdom of God, and a potent source of temptation and idolatry. He frequently warns against its corrupting influence on the heart.
Wealth, dangerous. Got it.
Next, consider the purpose of giving. In prosperity theology, giving is primarily a transactional seed that is sown with the explicit expectation of reaping a much larger material harvest from God, a guaranteed return on investment. It's a calculated exchange.
Give to get.
Right. But for Jesus, Giving is presented as an act of worship, an expression of radical trust in God's provision, and a compassionate act for the poor, done entirely without any expectation of personal material return or direct financial payback.
Give because you trust and care.
Exactly. Then there's the nature of faith. For the prosperity gospel, faith is often presented as an impersonal, creative force that humans can wield through words, their positive confession, to manipulate spiritual laws and literally create their own reality. It's a power to be commanded.
Faith is a force you control.
Yes. In the New Testament, however, faith is fundamentally defined as a relational trust and humble submission to a sovereign God. It's seen as a gift from God, a dependence on his character, not a human-generated force to be commanded or a formula to be activated.
Faith is trust in God.
Correct. And how about the very view of Jesus himself? In prosperity theology, Jesus is often presented primarily as an example of a faith-filled man who unlocked prosperity in his own life and whose atonement on the cross primarily removes material poverty and sickness, not just sin.
Jesus is the ultimate success story.
Kind of. However, the New Testament unequivocally portrays Jesus as the divine Son of God, whose atonement primarily removes sin and reconciles humanity to God. He explicitly lived a life of humility and material poverty, stating that foxes have dens and birds have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. His focus was never on earthly riches.
Jesus is Savior from sin who lived simply.
Precisely. Finally, let's look at the response to suffering. The prosperity gospel teaches that suffering, illness, or financial hardship are primarily a result of personal spiritual failure, a lack of faith or unconfessed sin, and should therefore be denied, rebuked, or confessed away through positive declarations.
Suffering means you failed spiritually.
That's the message. Jesus, however, taught that suffering is an expected, even inevitable part of the Christian life, one that produces endurance, character, and spiritual maturity. It's a way to identify with Christ himself, as he explicitly promised tribulation to his followers. The apostles consistently lived lives of hardship, persecution, and often poverty, not luxury.
Suffering is expected, even valuable. Big difference.
A massive difference. And this systematic distortion extends to several other core doctrines.
Like what else?
Firstly, there's the profound misinterpretation of covenants. The claim that the Abrahamic covenant guarantees material entitlement for all believers today is a foundational error. The New Testament, particularly in Galatians, clearly clarifies that the blessing promised to all nations through Abraham is the spiritual blessing of salvation.
Spiritual, not material.
Of being declared righteous by faith, and the gift of the Holy Spirit, not a blank check for earthly riches or physical health. Then there's the egregious distortion of the atonement. The idea that Christ's death on the cross was primarily intended to abolish material poverty and sickness is a gross misrepresentation of biblical theology. This claim is often based on a fabricated rich Jesus narrative that directly contradicts the overwhelming biblical witness of his humble, self-sacrificial life.
So they invent a rich Jesus to fit the theology.
Effectively, yes. The cross was about sin, about reconciliation, not about financial gain. The problem extends to the outright idolatry of mammon. By making wealth the primary evidence of God's favor and the central goal of the Christian life, prosperity theology elevates money to the status of an idol. This is precisely what Jesus warned against.
Serving money instead of God.
Exactly. Furthermore, the teaching of faith as manipulation within the Word of Faith movement, presenting faith as an impersonal spiritual force manipulated by human words, is a stark departure from the biblical understanding of faith as relational trust in a sovereign God.
Trying to control God with words.
Yes, rather than trusting him. Lastly, and profoundly damaging, is the almost complete ignoring of the theology of suffering. The prosperity gospel offers no coherent or compassionate framework for understanding suffering, pain, or persecution, central New Testament themes. By teaching that suffering is always a result of personal spiritual failure, this doctrine inflicts additional unbearable pain on those who are already hurting, effectively blaming the victim again and contradicting the biblical model of finding God's presence even in pain.
It leaves no room for hardship, which is part of life.
None whatsoever, unless it's framed as your own fault.
So to bring this all together, what does this truly mean for us, the listeners, now armed with this knowledge? We've seen that this Mammon Matrix isn't just a collection of unfortunate incidents. It's a deeply entrenched, multifaceted system.
What's truly striking is that the for-profit ministry phenomenon is a coherent, self-reinforcing, and profoundly problematic system built on a tripartite foundation.
Okay, break that down again.
First, it expertly exploits legal loopholes. particularly the church exception from financial reporting, to create a veil of opacity that shields it from any true public or regulatory accountability.
The black box.
Second, it employs highly sophisticated psychological tactics of persuasion and control, meticulously targeting deep human vulnerabilities and using mechanisms like cognitive dissonance to ensure a continuous flow of compliance and, of course, cash from its followers.
Mind games.
And third, perhaps most critically, it is underpinned by a fundamentally heretical theology, the prosperity gospel, that provides a seemingly divine justification for the entire enterprise, cunningly transforming greed into godliness and materialism into a spiritual mandate.
The theological justification. It all works together.
It's a very effective and destructive synergy.
And the human cost, beyond the financial aspect, seems immense.
The true cost of this Mammon Matrix is truly staggering, extending far beyond mere financial figures. It's measured not only in the billions of dollars diverted from genuine charitable causes to fund the lavish lifestyles of a select few leaders, but far more devastatingly, in the profound psychological, spiritual, and financial trauma inflicted upon millions of followers. By equating authentic faith with fraud, and by conflating genuine Christianity with consumerism and material gain, these ministries bring the entire Christian faith into disrepute.
It damages the perception of all churches.
It certainly can. They create widespread skepticism and cynicism not only among those outside the church, but also among those within, who witness such overt contradictions to the very teachings they claim to uphold. If we connect this to the bigger picture, addressing this systemic issue requires a truly multi-pronged approach.
What needs to happen?
Well, there is a clear need for legal and legislative reform to close the financial transparency loophole for large religious organizations that operate with the scale and commercial activity of major corporations.
More transparency, legally?
Yes. Accountability must also come from within the Christian community itself, with denominational and ecclesiastical bodies taking stronger, more unified stands against these profound distortions of the faith, clearly articulating what constitutes genuine Christian doctrine.
Churches policing themselves better.
And critically, there must be a greater focus on providing robust resources for the psychological and financial recovery of those who have been harmed.
Helping the victims.
Helping them heal from the deep wounds of spiritual abuse and rebuild their lives after leaving these environments.
So where does all of this leave us, the listener, with this knowledge about the Mammon Matrix? What's the ultimate takeaway for you to mull over?
The most powerful counter-narrative to this pervasive and damaging phenomenon lies in a profound return to the authentic, radical teachings of Jesus Christ.
Going back to the source.
Exactly. The enduring power of the Christian message is not found in its capacity to generate earthly wealth or fulfill material desires. Instead, it lies in its radical, countercultural call to a different kind of prosperity.
A different kind.
One defined by humility, by sacrificial service to others, by profound generosity, and by an immeasurable spiritual richness. The abundant life Jesus promised in John 10:10 was never about bigger barns or private jets. It was about a life of deep, transformative relationship with God, and a life characterized by courageous, self-sacrificial love for others. That is a reality that stands in stark and eternal opposition to the gospel of success and the pursuit of mammon. It's a spiritual prosperity that truly enriches the soul, not the bank account.
Something to truly mull over. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.